Are Trump's new tariffs really protecting the American economy? Or are they quietly driving up the cost of your car and your groceries? That's the question we're tackling today, and the answer might surprise you. As of August 2025, the U.S. has entered a new phase of trade confrontation with one of its closest neighbors, Canada. These aren't just minor policy tweaks. They're sweeping tariff hikes aimed at shaking up cross-border trade and forcing tough concessions. Here's what's on the table right now. A 35% tariff on Canadian goods that fall outside the USMCA agreement. A steep 50% duty on Canadian steel and aluminum, metals that form the backbone of American cars, trucks, and construction projects. And a 25% to 30% levy on autos and auto parts, directly hitting the supply chain that feeds factories from Michigan to Texas. Supporters say these measures are about defending American jobs, boosting domestic production, and leveling the playing field. Critics warn they could backfire, squeezing U.S. manufacturers, disrupting supply lines, and pushing prices higher for everyday Americans. In the next 18 minutes, we're breaking down the history, the politics, and the real-world impact of these tariffs. We'll look at how we got here, what's at stake, and where the next 12 months might take us. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the heart of this U.S.-Canada trade clash. From NAFTA to USMCA, how dairy became the flashpoint? Back in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, better known as NAFTA, transformed commerce across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. It tore down many trade barriers, opened markets, and supercharged cross-border business. But one key sector stayed off-limits: Canadian dairy. Canada's supply management system kept milk, cheese, and butter under strict national control, shielding local farmers from foreign competition. For American dairy producers, this was a long-standing frustration, a closed door in an otherwise open marketplace. Fast forward to 2017, when then-President Donald Trump put NAFTA back on the negotiating table. He argued that the agreement was outdated, unfair, and in need of a major overhaul. And in those tense talks with Ottawa, dairy wasn't just a side note. It was front and center. The result was the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, which came into effect in 2020. For the first time, the U.S. won a modest increase in access to Canada's dairy market, about 3.59% of total market share. On paper, it looked like a small but symbolic victory. In practice, it quickly became another battlefield. Washington accused Ottawa of allocating those new quotas in a way that favored Canadian processors over American exporters. Canadian officials pushed back, saying they were following the letter of the deal while defending their farmers. By the mid-2020s, the dairy dispute had resurfaced in almost every round of trade talks between the two countries. What started in 1994 as a single exemption in NAFTA had evolved into a recurring flashpoint, one that now sits at the heart of today's tariff fight. And as we'll see, it's not just about milk and cheese. It's about political leverage, rural livelihoods, and the balance of power in North American trade. Dairy supply, management, and the power of TARIFF. To understand why dairy is such a stubborn sticking point, you need to know how Canada's supply management system works. At its core, it's a framework that tightly controls how much milk, cheese, and butter is produced domestically. It also regulates the prices farmers receive, ensuring they earn a stable income regardless of global market swings. On the import side, Canada uses what's called a tariff rate quota, or TRQ, to limit foreign competition. Under the USMCA, the U.S. can export dairy products into Canada equal to about 3.59% of the Canadian market. Within that quota, tariffs are minimal, making trade possible. But once exports exceed that limit, the system slams the door shut. Over-quota tariffs skyrocket. 241% for milk, and an even steeper 298.5% for butter. At those rates, selling over-quota dairy in Canada becomes economically impossible. From Canada's perspective, this system keeps small and medium-sized farms alive, protects rural communities, and ensures food security. It also prevents the market from being flooded by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows and produce at a scale Canadian farms can't match. From the American viewpoint, however, it's a trade barrier in disguise, a way to block competitive U.S. products from entering the Canadian market. Critics in the U.S. say it undermines the spirit of free trade agreements and leaves American farmers with only token access to a lucrative neighboring market. This difference in philosophy, protection versus competition, is at the core of the dispute. And as tariffs rise on other goods, the pressure to challenge Canada's dairy wall is building fast. Bill C-282, Canada's political shield on dairy. In June 2023, Canada drew a bold line in the sand with the passage of Bill C-282. This legislation, which received royal assent on June 22, 2023, prohibits any Canadian government from offering dairy, poultry, or eggs as bargaining chips in future trade negotiations. It's not just a policy choice, it's now the law of the land. For rural Canada, Bill C-282 is more than an economic measure. It's a political safeguard designed to protect farming communities that see supply management as their lifeline. Generations of dairy, poultry, and egg farmers have relied on the stability provided by production quotas and controlled imports. Supporters argue that past trade deals chipped away at these protections, eroding the viability of family farms despite promises to defend them. By putting this ban into legislation, Parliament made it far harder for any future government to trade away these sectors, no matter the pressure from foreign partners. For the United States, this is a major roadblock. Washington has long sought greater access to Canada's dairy market, viewing it as one of the most stubborn trade barriers in North America. With Bill C-282 in place, negotiators know that any change would require repealing the law entirely, a move that would spark political backlash and require a full legislative process. In practical terms, it closes the door on dairy concessions until Canadian lawmakers themselves decide to reopen it. That means even as tariffs escalate and talks heat up, the dairy file is locked away in a legislative vault. For Ottawa, this is a shield. For Washington, it's a wall. And in the context of the current trade clash, that wall is proving harder to breach than ever. Auto and materials. How tariffs are hitting the heart of U.S. manufacturing. If there's one industry feeling the tariff squeeze in real time, it's the American auto sector, and nowhere more so than in Michigan. General Motors reported a $1.1 billion hit in the second quarter of 2025, directly linked to higher import duties. Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram, posted a first-half loss of €2.3 billion. Ford hasn't escaped either, projecting $2 to $3 billion in added costs for the year if current tariffs hold. The reason is simple. Canada is the United States' largest foreign supplier of both steel and aluminum. These metals are the bones and muscles of the automotive industry, used in everything from frames and body panels to engine blocks and safety structures. And for some models, there is no quick or cost-effective substitute. Take the Ford F-Series, America's best-selling truck for decades. Ford has a memorandum of understanding with Rio Tinto to secure low-carbon aluminum from Quebec, a supply chain built for efficiency and sustainability. Disrupting it would mean higher costs, longer lead times, and a scramble for alternative sources. Those costs are already rippling down the production line. Industry analysts warn that the average new vehicle could cost several $1,000s more if tariffs remain in place. Entry-level trims, the budget-friendly models that bring first-time buyers into the market, could disappear altogether, replaced by higher-margin versions fewer people can afford. For manufacturers, it's a balancing act between absorbing the hit and passing it along to consumers. For workers, the stakes are just as high. Fewer sales can mean fewer shifts, plant slowdowns, or even closures. And for buyers, the showroom sticker shock may be the clearest sign yet that the tariff fight isn't staying on the factory floor. Agriculture and the double-hit states. While Michigan's Auto Belt gets most of the headlines, America's farm country is also feeling the sting of the tariff war. In Wisconsin, proudly known as America's dairyland, the Canadian market has long provided a stable outlet for cheese, butter, and milk powder. Now, with trade tensions high and access tightening, that steady demand is under threat. A surplus at home can quickly drive down prices, leaving farmers squeezed between rising costs and shrinking revenues. Texas faces a different kind of challenge. As a major exporter of cotton, grains, and livestock, the Lone Star State isn't directly targeted by the current tariff lists. But its products often move through the same cross-border logistics channels, now tangled by retaliatory measures and slower freight flows. Any disruption in transport or pricing upstream can ripple through to Texas producers, cutting into margins and delaying shipments. Kansas, meanwhile, is caught in a particularly tough bind. The state is a key producer of agricultural machinery and industrial equipment, goods that rely on Canadian buyers and Canadian-sourced components alike. When tariffs push those buyers to scale back orders, and the cost of imported parts rises at the same time, it's a classic double hit. For states like these, the pain points aren't isolated to a single sector. Agriculture and manufacturing are intertwined, and when trade barriers slam into one, the other feels the impact almost immediately. A visual map of the Midwest and South would make it clear. The fallout from U.S.-Canada tensions isn't confined to the Great Lakes or border towns. It's spread across the country, from dairy barns to cotton fields to factory floors, and the damage is adding up. Mexico and India, the other fronts in a global tariff wave. While Canada dominates the headlines, two other trade fronts are quietly shaping the bigger picture: Mexico and India. Mexico, America's other USMCA partner, has been granted a 90-day pause before facing steep new tariffs. That grace period is more than a diplomatic courtesy. It's a lifeline for North America's integrated auto supply chain. Thousands of components, from wiring harnesses to transmissions, move back and forth across the U.S.-Mexico border every day. If those shipments were suddenly hit with duties of 25% to 50%, automakers in Detroit, Texas, and beyond could face crippling cost increases. The pause buys negotiators time, but it also hangs over the industry like a storm cloud. A breakdown in talks could mean a sudden and severe shock to production schedules and pricing. Half a world away, India is wrestling with its own round of tariff hikes. Certain goods, including jewelry, furniture, and specialized auto components, are now facing duties of up to 50%. For U.S. retailers and manufacturers that source from India, those increases pose tough choices: absorb the costs, raise prices, or scramble to find alternative suppliers. Either way, consumers could feel the pinch, from higher price tags in showrooms to more expensive items on store shelves. Together, these developments show that the 2025 tariff strategy isn't confined to a single dispute with Canada. It's part of a broader, more complex reshaping of global trade flows, one that's testing old alliances, redrawing supply maps, and challenging industries far beyond the dairy aisle. And the ripple effects are only just beginning to spread. Reality check. The true flow of dairy trade. When it comes to dairy, the political rhetoric often overshadows the actual numbers. In 2024, the United States exported roughly $1.18 billion worth of dairy products to Canada. In the same year, Canadian dairy exports to the U.S. totaled only about $330 million. That means, in raw dollar terms, the U.S. enjoys a sizable dairy trade surplus with its northern neighbor. So if America is selling more dairy to Canada than it's buying, why is this such a persistent flashpoint? The dispute isn't about supermarket shelves being flooded with foreign milk or butter. It's about how Canada allocates the import quotas it agreed to under the USMCA, and how it manages exports of processed dairy products like cheese, yogurt, and milk powder. U.S. producers argue that Ottawa structures these quotas in a way that favors Canadian processors, limiting the practical access American exporters were promised. Canadian officials counter that they are fully compliant with the letter of the agreement, and that protecting their supply management system is non-negotiable. In reality, this is less about raw dairy and more about higher-value processed goods, the kinds of products that carry bigger profit margins and stronger brand influence. For the U.S., cracking that market means more revenue and a stronger foothold in a sector they believe has been artificially restricted. For Canada, maintaining control means safeguarding rural incomes and the political stability of farm communities. The numbers show that both sides are already trading heavily in dairy, but the fight is over how that trade happens, and who gets to capture the most value. It's a battle being waged in quota allocations, tariff schedules, and the fine print of international trade law. The next 12 months. What to watch and final thoughts. As the dust from these tariff announcements settles, the real question is what the next year will bring. There are 3 key indicators that will tell us whether the strategy is holding, or if it's starting to strain the very industries it aims to protect. First, steel and aluminum prices. If costs for these core materials continue to climb, the impact will cascade through manufacturing, from autos to construction, raising prices and squeezing margins. Second, fourth quarter 2025 earnings in the auto sector. This will be the first full quarter where the new tariff regime is fully baked into production costs and consumer prices. A sharp drop in sales or profits could signal that buyers are hitting pause and manufacturers are feeling the crunch. Third, new or expanded U.S. farm support programs. If Washington rolls out fresh aid packages for dairy, livestock, or crop producers, it could be an admission that retaliatory measures and lost export markets are hurting rural America. All of this is happening in the shadow of the 2026 USMCA review, a built-in checkpoint that could either diffuse tensions or cement them for years. If that review fails, today's temporary tariff hikes could become the new normal, reshaping trade flows, consumer prices, and business strategies for a generation. And that raises the ultimate question: will these tariffs truly make America more self-reliant? Or will they end up costing consumers more than they protect? It's a debate that will play out not just in Washington and Ottawa, but in factory floors, farm fields, and household budgets across North America. We'll be here tracking every twist and turn, breaking down the facts so you can see past the headlines. So, what do you think? Smart strategy or self-inflicted wound? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if you found this breakdown helpful, and subscribe so you don't miss our updates as this trade story continues to unfold.